The Mama Take Heart podcast with Sabrina Rettle is brought to you by Life Audio and is a part of our Faith Toolkit series. For more inspirational, faith-affirming podcasts, visit lifeaudio.com.
Welcome to Mama Take Heart, Understanding Your Gen Z Girl. I'm your host, Sabrina Rettle, and I'm here to help you be the gospel-centered, compassionate, and influential voice in your girl's life. Today, we're talking about helping our girls understand the difference between healthy versus unhealthy relationships. My guest today is Jillian Miles. She has a Master of Arts and provisionally licensed mental health practitioner. She earned her MA in professional counseling from Crown College and her Bachelor of Science in Psychology, Christian Ministry, and a minor in Bible from Grace. Jillian has gained additional training and experience in crisis intervention, trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy, as well as the Circle of Security and parent-child interaction therapy training programs. Thanks for joining us today, Jillian. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Well, I'd like to start by, if we could kind of talk to our moms, help them talk to their girls about relationships and how this relates to friendships as well as romantic partnerships. So let's start with, what does a healthy relationship look like?
I think that just kind of like with beginning with relationships in general, that we have to kind of just look at relationships as a whole, like a holistic approach, not just specifically within friendships or intimate partner relationships, but also like familial relationships and how they have a direct impact on how our children begin to develop those relationships. So just an awareness, like as a parent in your relationship with your children directly, how that has a direct impact on how they see those relationships built, as well as like relationships with siblings, and just how those begin to create our overall worldview of relationships. So I would think that I would begin with a healthy relationship. Some of the key points I would see within healthy relationships include respect within that, communication, trust, honesty, the ability to have time away from each other as well as time spent with each other, equality. And then, so that would be things I would recommend like within a healthy relationship.
Yeah, let's break that down a little bit, because I like the way you said that it actually begins in the home, what a healthy relationship would look like. So let's start with respect, because a lot of parents are on the child respect me, but I believe that respect is both ways. So how we respect the child or express our respect to the child and their expectation in respecting us.
Right. And I think that looks different based upon, like an age of the child. But I think that being aware that a child's respect level begins very much at like a young child, infant, toddler age, and just being aware of that, those boundaries that children are learning have a direct relationship with relationships, right? So as they learn the boundaries that they're having and creating, usually by 3, they say, is kind of like when we have our boundaries created. And so like if a child is not aware of their own healthy boundaries or has not been given healthy boundaries, which sometimes may feel that maybe they're doing things that maybe you wouldn't necessarily agree of from a parenting perspective, but learning how to teach them what's appropriate boundaries and inappropriate boundaries at that young age has a direct impact on those relationships. And so like helping them navigate through their feelings and their emotions at such a young age and how they can communicate that or how they can show those respectfully has a direct impact on then how are they able to keep those boundaries healthy as they navigate through them as they get older.
I like that you said that the boundaries and that they're established at an early age. I remember my daughter, by the time I think she was in 4th or 5th grade, and I was considered the strict parent of all her friends. And I would tell her, I'm not strict. I have boundaries. I always said that. I always said it's about boundaries, and that I didn't want her to be exposed to everything so quickly. I always thought, what's the rush? And you won't have anything to look forward to if you do everything now, you know? So it was like, everything was, for me, was delay and be age appropriate and delay. She didn't, I was home. She didn't need a phone when she was in the third grade. I was home. You don't need a phone. And so for me, it was all about, the boundary thing. For her, she always said that everyone says you're so strict. And, but now that she's 19 now, so now she says, you really weren't strict. She said it was normal boundary. It was things that at my age, whether or not I should have been doing. So it's good that she was able to see, one, and now she's like, I wonder why they thought that was so strict. So it paid off.
Yeah.
Mama's just hang in there.
Yes.
At the time, sometimes they're not with you on it, but hindsight's 2020. So, okay, let's go on to the other points to make for healthy relationships.
Yeah, so I think respect communication. I often tell my clients, I know teenagers are not necessarily always wanting to talk about their days. Sometimes they appear to want not to spend time. So if we're coming from like a familial perspective, maybe they're not wanting to spend time because of course they're wanting to spend all their time with their friends. But I think that making a designated amount of time within your family for healthy communication speaks volumes for if they do find themselves in an unhealthy community or unhealthy relationship, whether it's a friendship or a partnership that they find themselves in. Because if you have that natural line of communication that you've already developed, then they're able to come back, and that's a familiar place versus now you're trying to incorporate it. So lots of times I encourage clients and parents to have like a good point or like check in about a good and a bad of the day. So kind of what I call them with clients are happies and crappies. So the happy part of my day and the crappy part of my day. And if it's on a regular basis, then you're just communicating about that versus now I have to learn how to communicate with my child when I'm recognizing that something isn't healthy in a friendship or something isn't healthy in their relationship or who they're choosing to be with.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
so communication would be one. Trust. I think that also comes from a familiar standpoint, allowing your child to gain that trust from you so that so that they understand what trust looks like. I think that maybe what trust looks like in a home can look completely different than trust outside of the home. And so how do you encourage your child to be trusting, or are you creating an environment of trust within your home? Because sometimes what we think is trust might not necessarily be trust. And that just, we all have our own worldviews. So is there something in their lives that has had an impact directly with their ability to trust? And knowing that could not only could be created in the home or outside of the home, but how does that impact their relationships as well? And so like looking at it from a big picture, not just specifically the people that they're choosing to be in relationship with.
One thing you said was equality. Now, let's talk about that, because a lot of parents are like, well, they're not equal to me because I'm the parent, and I get that too, because I do have a level of respect that I expect from my children. And there are times, but one thing I never did say is because I said so. That doesn't make any sense to me. You have to tell them the why behind it, especially this generation. This generation is Google generation. If they want to know something, they're going to look it up. And so they kind of expect the same thing from us, even though we don't think that we should have to give them an explanation. To me, it's wise to give them an explanation because it helps in their cognitive abilities of why they are doing certain things or why we are asking certain things of them. So talk to me about that equality part.
So yeah, equality just within, and I mean, most parents, like at the end of the day, look at it like kind of like this is the standard or this is the expectation within the home. So I think that as a child grows and understands the expectation or the standard within the home, that allowing them that space to make healthy decisions, which could look like them coming in saying, this is kind of what I would like to do. And then like having a conversation about maybe what your expectation is versus what they would like to do, and then coming to a middle ground. So the equality of that then appears, and then the child is learning how to navigate those within relationships and making healthy choices within their relationships, as well as you're encouraging them to begin to see it from an expectation and a standard from within the home. As my children, I had 3 children myself, and I have a 22-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 15-year-old. I was never the parent that really had necessarily a curfew. It wasn't because I didn't have a curfew. It was because it was based upon each situation. Then allowing them to, if you knew what you were doing, or if it was just like, we're going to go hang out, well, what does hang out look like? Because what ends up happening is that by default, depending on the age of teenagers, whether they're born and raised in a Christian or non-Christian home, developmentally, they want and desire a connection with their peers. And that's the closest relationships that they have in their teenage years. And so if you try to control it so much, children will figure out ways to get what they want or move around. And so how do you keep that line of communication open so that it is a healthy relationship and that you do have an awareness of what your children are doing? And so that's the approach that I tend to take. Doesn't mean that it was the make all be all and that it was the right way. It just allowed for communication to be constantly open. And then that way, if they were going to be going somewhere that was appropriate, if they were going to go to a movie and then wanted to go get ice cream or something to eat afterwards, then having that communication of, well, when do you think it's an appropriate time to be home? And so I think that just like as that continues and as they grow and develop, teenage years happen and they come and go, and within a short period of time, they're out of the home, and then you have no control over that. So that's when you want them to know the standard and expectation so that they're safe in other environments when they're not at home.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we did have curfews. However, we were like that too. It depended on what the activity was. And like you said, if they wanted to go have ice cream or whatever with the friends. So sometimes we would be lenient on it, like you said, depending on the situation. Okay.
Disrespectful. So not the people in those relationships, friendships, relationships are not considerate of that your feelings or boundaries. So like if there's not an awareness, or maybe they don't have the capability to, based upon their own worldview and experience, to even be able to process your feelings and your boundaries, that would be disrespectful, non-communicative, the inability to communicate within the relationship. Maybe if there's constantly conflict, or you don't feel that you can approach them with maybe something that might be going on. And this can be also, like I said, not just friendships or relationships, but friendships as well. Not trusting, not able to have privacy. I think we're in the age of social media. And so I think that so much social media comes from trust and a distrust place. And so like, how does your relationships navigate that? Dishonesty, one or both partners, people in it, telling lies, distruths. I think that distruths, or maybe not the reality. And I think that being aware of like what the reality is of a situation, as it might not necessarily be that they're being dishonest, but there's also a component of somebody's worldview having a total different perspective. And so just being aware of that when it comes to relationships, not spending time with others. So not allowing for only wanting your friend to only spend time with you, or only wanting your boyfriend or girlfriend to only spend time with you. And so navigating through those, like, can't spend time with friends or other peers or whatever that may look like. And then struggling for control. So maybe one feels a desire to have more control over the other, and that there's not a balance within the relationship. Maybe one always is choosing to do the activity versus the other not being able to, and having coming to a middle ground.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing about autonomy, agency, and voice. And I just did a couple of podcasts on voice, because that's very important to me, to be able to voice your opinion, or voice your displeasure, or voice what it is you'd like to do. And if any of that is being ignored or not respected, that's definitely a key sign, and also not being able to have autonomy in the relationship, and not being able, which I'm going to have to do a podcast on that for the moms on when our child starts to develop their autonomy. Actually, they start young, but it looks different as they grow older. And sometimes it looks like rebellion when it's really not rebellion. It's I'm trying to find out who I am.
Navigating their world.
Yes. And then how to respectfully allow them to do that and just keep an eye on it, so to speak. And then agency, just being able to stand up for yourself and say if something makes you uncomfortable or whatever the case may be. And that is something we have to learn also as parents, to allow our children to be able to express that to us, and not just, like you said, the control part of it, just continuously control. We talked about how we can help our girls learn to establish boundaries in all of our relationships. And one of the things that I had spoke about for myself was you asked the question because as Christians, we're told if the person is a Christian, you have to love them as a brother and sister in Christ. And then if they're not a Christian, you're taught you have to love your enemy. And my thing is, how do I teach her to be discerning and wise in relationships, and when to love up close and then when to love at a distance?
I think that as Christians, we have to define what we find ourselves defining as love. So if we use Christ as what love is, and that's how we define love, then we respond like Christ would. And so for me, loving close and loving at a distance also looks like I can still love you and not necessarily agree with choices that you're making. And how do we encourage our daughters? How do we encourage ourselves to be comfortable with that? Doesn't mean that you totally discount a person. Love is an action, and so it's not just about a feeling.
Yes.
It's an action that we act upon. And so just knowing that, like, you can still love this person even if they haven't necessarily treated you the best, because in action, Christ loved us before we were even born. And so I think that just being aware that it's an action and not just necessarily around a feeling that we're going to feel. Love doesn't always feel the best. And so that when it's not feeling good doesn't mean that we cannot still continue to love that person through and still at a distance. And so I feel like I kind of do my overall healthy and unhealthy relationships, everything around boundaries. I kind of like I have an acronym that I've always used with my kids, and it's EMS. So emotionally, mentally, and spiritually ready. And so I, with that question about loving our brothers and sisters in Christ versus loving an enemy, like emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. So like, how can you do this emotionally so that you're stable? How can you do it mentally so that you're stable? And how can you do it spiritually so that like it's still within your values and your faith and your beliefs? And so how do you navigate all of those encompassing? And so that's kind of like the foundation that I use. And then how does that remain healthy? Like, can you love an enemy in a healthy way from a distance? Can you love partner or an ex-partner from a healthy place, or does it remain unhealthy? And then that way you need to remove yourself. And so how do you navigate those from an emotional, mental, and spiritual perspective is kind of like my threshold for answering the healthy versus unhealthy. And just the awareness that what might be healthy for us as parents might not be healthy for our children or our daughters, and vice versa. What they might see as healthy from a relationship worldview, because their worldview is completely different, and there still could be some innocence within their relationships, that we have to take that into consideration as well. There is gray area in relationships, and what might be healthy for me in a relationship might not be healthy for you. And so I think that just respecting that within our daughters and helping them learn how to navigate that becomes more important than saying this is an unhealthy or this is a healthy relationship, because what our life might put in our lives as healthy might not be the same as for other people. And so I think just that awareness of it, and how do you help them learn to navigate it is really what is the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I ask that question, my concern is mostly of if you're seeing a shift in your daughter's behavior, she's becoming small, she's sad, those types of things is kind of what I'm thinking about, to make sure that she's not an abusive. Unhealthy is abusive relationship, and for her to be able to know the difference between someone who not just says, like you said, love is an action. So not just says that they love you, but they show you that they love you, and they show you in, like you said, a mental, emotional, and spiritual way, not just in what they say. And so that's one of the things I always try to emphasize with my own kids. Are the words matching with the actions? Are you saying you love me, but then you're treating me like this? Or are you saying you love me and you're upholding me, supporting me, that sort of thing. I really like this conversation. It was good talking to you today, Jillian. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you again for having me.
Well, remember, God is for you and you are not alone. With His Spirit, you are filled with courage and strength of purpose. So don't fret, Mama. Instead, take heart.
Mama Take Heart is a production of Life Audio and the Salem Web Network. If you liked what you just listened to, would you take a second and leave us a rating in your favorite podcast app? It really does help more people like you find our show. This podcast is produced by me, Kelly Givens, and Stephen Sanders, with executive oversight by Stephen McGarvey. You can find more podcasts like this over at lifeaudio.com.